Welcome to Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine. I'm your host, longtime astrologer, psychic healer, and yogi, Jill Jardine. In today's episode, I'm going to discuss the major astrological transits that everybody experiences in life. So you'll want to stay tuned to see if you are going through one of these major cycles. Welcome to the episode of Cosmic Scene when I discuss the major astrological transits that everybody experiences in their lifetime. We'll talk about when they occur, what age they happen at, and what you can expect during these astrological transits. This episode is an updated new version of an episode I did early on in 2020 on Cosmic Scene, but I'm adding the dates of the groups that are going to be experiencing these key astrological transits during 2021 and 2022. We'll talk about the generational groups and birth dates of the groups that are currently experiencing these major life transits. The thing I wanted to remind listeners too is that I hint a little bit about these major life transits in an episode called Kundalini Baby, as well as one called Key Astrological Transits. So let me tell you a little bit about basic astrology information. Some of you may not realize that all the planets in astrology are named after Roman deities, such as Saturn and Mercury, Venus, Jupiter. These deities also have their Greek counterparts, their ancient Greek counterparts. So, for instance, Venus is Aphrodite in the Greek, Venus in Roman. Saturn is Saturn, the planet Saturn in Roman, but Kronos in the Greek. So there's mythology that connects the planetary energies with the human condition. For instance, Mercury is the messenger of the gods, and the Roman name is Mercury. Mercury was a psychopomp, helping the dead pass to other realms and bringing messages between dimensions. He had the winged feet and hat, and his Greek counterpart is Hermes. The other thing about Mercury, it's the symbol of the caduceus, or the sign of healing, with the staff with two snakes on either side. So the Mercury energy is healing if we use our words in a powerful, healing way, and we use our words not to hurt, but to heal. So Saturn was the planet and the energy of the Roman god Saturn, who rules time. And because of this, I want to discuss the Saturn returns. They happen twice in our life. I'm going to break it down and talk about the first one. But Saturn return happens at between 28 to 30 years old, and then again between 58 and 60 years old. And this is a time when we reassess our life in our body, and are we doing what we're here to do? We also will be thinking of the structures that support us in our life, and if we need to make any big changes in those structures. So the first Saturn return everybody goes through occurs between 28 to 30 years old. The planet Saturn was named after the Roman deity who was the Greek counterpart to Kronos. So Saturn and Kronos are the lords of time. They rule structure and form and time and order. Saturn is the planet that is the lord of time and determines how much time we have in this physical incarnation. Kind of a big deal. The soul has to come into form to incarnate in this lifetime, and this is Saturn's domain. Basically, our soul is coming into physical form, and Saturn dictates the conditions around that. So at Saturn return, the first one, and at the second one, people wake up to the limitations of life and embodiment in a body. So In the first one, people are starting to feel like I'm getting a little old. I'm pushing 30. In the second one, they know they're old. I'm pushing 60. So there's different things that would obviously play out during the two different Saturn returns. And I always tell people who are in their second Saturn return between 58 and 60 years old, reflect back what happened in your life between 28 and 30, because perhaps this is a follow-up to something that didn't happen or that did happen, but you're going to take it to a deeper level. So for instance, what I hear people tell me is that, yeah, I changed careers and I started to do a career path or job that I really, really like. This is between 28 and 30 at the first Saturn return. At the second one, they may say, yeah, I've worked my career now for 28 to 30 years and I'm ready to take a break and try something new. Or even in some cases, between 58 and 60, people are even eyeing an early retirement. But certainly it is a time of switching gears and how you're using your time in your life. How much are you spending in the work life? How much at home? And people tend to seek more of a balance at the second Saturn return with how they're spending their time. So people do wake up at the Saturn return to limitations of life and the embodiment in a body. They also have major psychological and emotional transformation. And ideally, at this time of the Saturn return between 28 to 30, they become spiritual adults. I say between 58 and 60, at the second Saturn return, they become spiritual elders. So people who are turning, between 28 and 30, the first Saturn return, they're being pressured internally to actualize themselves constructively in life. Now, that could also affect relationship. A lot of times people will go back to school, get a second degree, or finish a degree they didn't do. They will move. They will evaluate relationships. Some people will break up a relationship that has been going on until they're about 29. Some will initiate new relationships. Some people get married during that time between 28 and 30. So if you're beyond that time, let's say you're in your 30s or 40s, think back to when you were between 28 and 30 and what was going on in your life then, and however you may have had resistance. It's not an easy time necessarily for people. The Saturn return, the first one. There may be resistance to making necessary changes in life to develop to the next stage. So if there is resistance, there can be suffering and there can be loss. If we don't take the initiative in making changes, sometimes the universe will do it for you. So at the first Saturn return, between 28 and 30 years old, one may lose a job, a relationship may come to an end, or some other direction in life suddenly comes to a halt and there's a pivot. Just think of it this way. At the first Saturn return, the person is being polished like a gem to remove the dirt surrounding the diamond of the soul. So in other words, there can be some issues around ego and soul. The soul's trying to come through like a lotus through the mud to shed the ego and connect with the real purpose of this lifetime. There's a word for that purpose in Sanskrit. It's called dharma. So it's not just about a job. It's about a calling. And in general, I've noticed society is waking up to what is my dharmic path. And you can pursue your dharmic path at any time. I mean, for some people, it could simply be it's not simply be, but it could be being a parent. That by nurturing their children and teaching their children well, that they are pursuing the dharma of this lifetime. Not everyone has a dharmic path that's connected to a job or work either. So anyway, at the first Saturn return, this idea of dharma or right purpose becomes so important. And because of this, some people may change jobs or career paths. As I mentioned, they may go back to school or take advanced educational degrees. And many may move geographically to a different place. The other thing I've noticed with Saturn returns, people can come home and live with their parents leading up to or during the Saturn return. especially in these economic times, or if they've been staying with their parents because they're in between, they can tend to launch at the Saturn return and move away and start something new. So it's a really, really important time. As I said too, regarding relationships, they may end at a Saturn return because they're no longer serving the trajectory of the life path, or one may become more committed to a relationship and become married. Saturn rules responsibility, so many may find themselves having to be more responsible by choice or by necessity. Maybe starting a family of their own will bring on that additional responsibility, or others may find themselves being more accountable to their boss or a career. And as I mentioned, Saturn rules physical form. So many may experience health issues at this time between 28 to 30 years old. And by health, I mean physical, emotional, psychological, mental health as well. So there may be some form of life crisis at this time. Saturn also rules teachers. So some may connect with a spiritual teacher or guru for the first time at their Saturn return between 28 to 30 years old. I know I did. I met my first guru from India during my Saturn return. So who's going through their Saturn return, their first Saturn return that is between 28 to 30 years old? I noticed the current group, it's happening pretty much smack at 29. And so that current group are, drum roll, people who were born between February 1991 and January 1994 will be going through their first Saturn returns during 2021 and 2022. Now, this is because the planet Saturn is transiting the sign Aquarius. And the last time it was there was from February 1991 through January 1994. So in 2021, we're going to see that the kids who are now adults, born in 92, are going through it, 92 and 1993. Then in 2022, those born in 93 and 94 will have their Saturn returns. So, but let's say you're not having your Saturn return or you're not turning 28 to 30. Just think back, what were you doing in late 1991, 1992? Think about that for this year, 2021. What were you doing? What changes were you making in your life? And this may be a revisiting to that time in your life because we're now the 28 to 29, 30-year cycle out. So think back what was happening then, and there can be a level of revisitation. So the group born in late 1991 through 1994, January 1994, you are in it. You're in the Saturn return. And so all those symptoms that I discussed earlier, you may be experiencing it. So that's the Saturn return. The next major life transit I want to discuss is called the Uranus Opposition. And that occurs generally between 40 and 44 years old. And so it is, the Uranus opposition comes between the first Saturn return and second Saturn return. And so the groups that are going through their Uranus opposition key life transit during 2021 and 2022 were born in 1976 through 1979. So they're turning between 40 and 44 years old. So listen up if you're in that group, because you're going to have big changes in your life. That's the keynote of the Uranus opposition. In astrology, the planet that Uranus governs is Aquarius, and a full lifetime is considered to be 84 years, which is the cycle it takes for Uranus to go around to get back to where it was 84 years earlier. So anyway, when Uranus goes back to where it was. It's called a Uranus return, and that's at 84. So if we take half of that, 84, it takes us to 42 years old. So approximately between 40 and 44 is the Uranus opposition. Uranus in astrology is the change maker, the great awakener. It's considered a revolutionary planet. It is also considered to be eccentric, erratic, and unconventional. Uranus is like lightning. It can bring in flashes of intuition and inspiration. So when Uranus opposition hits between 40 and 44 years old for this current group, there's going to be a midlife crisis, and it's going to bring big changes in someone's life. So the planet Uranus was also known as Uranus, in the Greek counterpart was the god of the sky. So Uranus as a planet doesn't like limitations. It wants things wide open. So when somebody comes into the Uranus opposition in their early 40s, they might get bored with their life and they want to make some change. Uranus is also an indicator in astrology of freedom. And so here we go, classic midlife crisis. And that means that some things are going to change. People may start doing erratic things, such as having an affair and abruptly ending a marriage or quitting a job. And suddenly this will happen because Uranian energy always comes in very fast. So even the person who's experiencing their Uranus opposition may not even be aware that they're being taken over by this part of themselves that is driving them to do things a bit erratic or even irrationally. So there may be some spontaneous things like quitting a job or changing career paths. You don't want to do anything rashly during that time period. You really do need to take time and process it. And by the way, Uranus tends to go back and forth 3 times over a degree. So it is a process. It doesn't happen just one and done and you're it. You usually have about the year of the exact Uranus opposition to go through this and then make decisions. We talked about Kundalini in the Kundalini Baby podcast. And at Uranus, what happens is the Kundalini can just naturally get freed up and people can have spontaneous Kundalini awakenings. And so there is a connection between Uranus and Kundalini and sex. So people have been repressed in that way, may open up. Or if they have gotten bored with their current partner, they may seek out another one because the Uranian energy wants to experiment. Uranus is very experimental. The Kundalini driving them and coming up, advancing through their body, is lighting up their chakras. And it's very interesting because traditionally between 40 to 42 years old, the area where men can be blocked is in their heart chakra, and that is why they seek out new partners for more of a heart connection. Maybe things have just gotten really stagnant in a relationship. And for women, the traditional place where women are blocked is the throat chakra, and that's where we see women trying to express their truth and maybe making big changes with their careers or speaking up to their partners or husbands and saying, I want to do things differently. So we see a lot of change and almost like inner pressure or tension bubbling up at the Uranus opposition in the early 40s. For instance, if someone has been a stay-at-home mom, they may want to go back to work. Or if they've been working in the world, they may want to become a stay-at-home dad. People may leave their corporate or traditional jobs to start their own business at a Uranus opposition. Or they may do something drastic, like move across the country or pack up their family and move to a different place, whether abroad or in the country they currently live in. Lots of big, big shifts and changes happen at the Uranus opposition. So again, if you're in that group that are born in 1976 through 1979, you're going to be having it in 2021 and 2022. And so these major life transits are a great time to get an astrological reading with your favorite astrologer, Jill Jardine. You can contact me through JillJardineAstrology.com and book your session so you can find out exactly what is the duration of this major life transit and specifically to you, because it's going to manifest differently for people depending on the location of these planets in your chart, i.e., where is this Uranus opposition playing out? Is it in your house of home and career, or is it in your seventh house of relationship and house of self? That's going to definitely affect relationships. So we can get very specific when we do your personal chart to see where this will play out in your life, what arena, what house is out of the 12 houses, and also if there's any other planets involved, because sometimes these transits are not independent to just the planet I'm discussing. There may be others involved. So when I come back, I'm going to talk about the final 3 major transits: the Chiron return at 50 years old, the second Saturn return between 58 and 60 years old, and the Uranus return at 84. So stay tuned.
As autumn eclipses into winter, don't you just feel like relaxing in front of the fire on a wintry night with a satisfying glass of wine? But you can't stand the pesticides and fillers you get in most wines? Let me tell you about Scout and Cellar Clean Crafted wine. Scout and Cellar is organic, clean crafted, and always free of synthetic pesticides, chemical additives, and sweeteners. Scout and Cellar wines come in every variety from sparkling to rosé, whites to reds, in gift sets, cans, and bottles ideal for holiday gifts and celebrating the new year, 2021. Try this delicious and pure wine straight from the grape to your glass at www.scoutandcellar.com/JillJardine.
The next major life transit I want to discuss is called the Chiron Return, and that occurs when someone turns 50 years old. So yay, you made it through to 50, but well, hold on to your hat. There's going to be some tests. What? Why is that? Well, Chiron. Chiron was the wounded healer teacher in the Roman pantheon. He was a healer, and he was half man, half centaur. So his upper body was that of a human, and his lower part was that of a horse, a centaur. And this is symbolic of us as humans being half human, half animal. We have an animal side, and we need to integrate both the human and animal side, or we can run into problems. So in the mythology of the Roman pantheon, Chiron was a healer. He became a healer when he accidentally was shot in his left hip with an arrow by Hercules. So left is the female side, by the way, and Chiron was a male. So there's some of this inner female anima energy for Chiron to discover. In other words, his inner female. So when the arrow was shot in Chiron's left hip, it became a wound that couldn't heal. And so he was trying to heal himself. And as he did, he discovered all these other forms of medicine and healing on the way to try to heal himself. And think about things that begin with that CH, like Chiron is CHIRON. Chiropractic came out of the word Chiron and Chiron's discovery of new healings. Chiropractic. Chiromancy is the reading of your palm. These are all words having to do with healing modalities that have the root in the Chironic mythology. And so as Chiron was trying to heal himself, he did discover all these other forms of medicine and healing. And he ended up healing a lot of the heroes in the Greek Roman pantheon, like Hercules and Achilles. In the meantime, he did discover forms of healing. So when we have our Chiron return at 50, we're going to be discovering that we're healing aspects of ourselves that have been ignored, or we have separated from, or repressed or suppressed. A lot of times inner child issues will come up. You know, you think at 50, well, you know, I'm way into adulthood and I've healed everything. Not necessarily so. In my practice, a lot of people at 50, these deep-seated wounds or psychological issues can come to a head in a very powerful way because it's now or never to heal them. People are healing their core wound. So it can be a very intense time. So the people experiencing their current Chiron return were born in 1970, 71, and 72. in 2022, the 1972ers will be going through their Chiron return at 50. So when somebody goes through that, they are going to be grappling with a core wound and really wanting to heal it once and for all. And these wounds can also show up very much in the physical body, and big health issues can occur at this time. Specifically, again, heart issues for men at the Chiron return, and hormonal issues for women, especially throat chakra issues like thyroid disorder, can show up at 50 and in the early 50s. At the Chiron return, people can experience mental, emotional, hormonal issues. There can be big losses in the life at the Chiron return. For example, one of the classic forms of loss at a Chiron return would be the empty nest syndrome, when the children are getting older and they're going off to college and the nest becomes empty, the family home shifts and changes because the kids have left. This can cause depression and a sense of loss in the remaining parent or parents. The other issue that happens for people around their Chiron return is that they would tend to have elder parents, and these parents may start passing away. So it is a time of loss. The good news about the Chiron return, though, is that if people didn't find their freedom or life purpose at their Uranus opposition between 40 to 40 years old, 44, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, the Chiron return is the time to find that personal freedom. At the Chiron return, one may turn to things such as alternative healing for themselves, modalities like yoga, acupuncture, and energy work to regenerate themselves may find their way if they hadn't discovered them earlier. This goes on as they come into their 50s and beyond. Also, they may look at working in their life in a different way and maybe embracing healing modalities and sharing them with others. So the Chiron return is quite the transformational time. So the fourth major life transit that everybody goes through astrologically is the second Saturn return. As I discussed earlier, the first Saturn return happens between 28 to 30 years old, and the second Saturn return occurs between 58 through 60 years old. And so very interesting, because the people who are going to go through their second Saturn return were born when Saturn was last in Aquarius, and they are people born in 1962, 1963, and 1964. You're it. Get ready for Saturn. It's going to be bringing some tests. It's going to help you, though, make some big changes in your life. So what you need to do is think about what happened during your first Saturn return, which would have been in 1992, 1993, 94. And know what were the keynotes of your life during that Saturn return. The second level, or the second Saturn return between 58 and 60 years old, will be another level of what happened back in your late 20s, and something coming full circle from 29 to 30 years old. I mean, I hear all these stories of these people who reconnect with somebody, a boyfriend from earlier in their life that they dated in their 20s, or even the high school guy that they never dated but somehow shows up in their life. This all quite happens. I see it over and over again at that second Saturn return between 58 and 60 years old. It can be a bit of a doozy, the second Saturn return, if you're not prepared for it. It can bring up health issues. Sometimes out of the blue, we hear about people dying at 59 years old. That's quite the number that shows up, 58, 59, 60. Well, that's their second Saturn return. People can die suddenly or develop or realize that they have a chronic disease between 58 and 60 years old. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, but remember, Saturn rules physical form. That's why there's a connection with Saturn to our physical bodies. Health. That's Saturn. Saturn is also the Lord of time. And when one reaches their second Saturn return between 58 to 60 years old, they may realize that their time in this incarnation is running out. So that will put a little fire under them to get things done that perhaps they haven't done. You might even see people writing wills and preparing their estates at this time, even if they are healthy. The Saturn return at 58, 59, 60 years old gives people the impetus that I have some things I really need to do in this lifetime, or there's some things I need to do quite differently than I have been. And so this tends to open the door up for people. If they can, at this point in their life, they may travel more, especially if they haven't traveled much earlier in their life. It's also a time to make hay while the sun shines. In other words, what has been the unlived life. This all happens as well at the Uranus opposition between 40 to 44. Not so much at the Chiron return, though, at 50. At the Chiron return, people are sort of taking care of themselves. It's a big self-care transit. While by the second Saturn return, if one has their health, they're going to want to do some things physically. They are going to want to regenerate their body. Thus, they can get into things like yoga and really get serious about health and healing if they hadn't done that by their Chiron return at 50. Remember, I said earlier, at the first Saturn return between 28 and 30, one becomes a spiritual adult. At the second Chiron return between 58 and 60 years old, one may become a spiritual elder, meaning that they start taking their spiritual life very, very seriously and may realize that this is their ticket into a smooth transition into the next phase of life called death. Not that people prepare for that in the West. It's more in Eastern cultures, such as the Tibetans, that life is a preparation for death. But people can really get that wake-up call at the second Saturn return and through their 60s, and thus really make a strong attempt or not effort, the attempt to connect with their soul and to get really clear about what this life has been about and will be about. The other thing that people can do at that second Saturn return is to think about retirement, or some actually do retire. If you are in a traditional job, you can manage your finances better, the practicality of your life to give some freedom at the second Saturn return. And so there is a lot of restructuring that happens at the second Saturn return between 58 to 60 years old. Many may sell the family home or the marital home. Many go through divorces at this time, as children are now out of college and having their own lives generally. So someone in a marriage may look around and be, why am I still with this partner? I should have gotten divorced years ago. And so men may look for younger women at this time, and women may look for younger men at the second Saturn return. This can happen at the Chiron return at 50 as well. So we see people ending their traditional careers around the second Saturn return, and even maybe starting their own businesses for more freedom. We see major moves as these marital or family homes are sold. This is the classic time when people might be moving to Florida or somewhere warmer because their body doesn't want to feel the cold. Not always, though. They can wait until later, but it tends to be a traditional time to unload that family home. And as I said, a lot of people will get divorced or end relationships at the second Saturn return and look for a younger mate. So it really is a time to look at your practical reality and your physical reality. Saturn rules the root chakra. And what do you need to stay well and healthy in this incarnation? And what is incomplete about your life purpose or the dharma that you want to fulfill? So it becomes very important to buckle down and start doing that. Looking at the karma you accrued during this lifetime and how you can mitigate it if you haven't already, and looking at the dharma that you want to achieve in this lifetime if you haven't already. And then artha, which has to do with the wealth. Has enough wealth been accumulated? And kama, K-A-M-A. How is that love life as you end the decade of the 50s? There is a final major life transit that people will go through if they live that long. And that happens at 84 years old at the Uranus return. And as I said earlier, a complete astrological lifetime is 84 years. So you have done the full round of the planet Uranus around the zodiac, and it returns to where it was when you were born. The group that's going through their Uranus return is now the people born in 1937, 1938, 1939. Remember, Uranus is the great awakener. So people who are having their Uranus return wake up in this lifetime and see what was this all about. It's important that they realize all the connections they've made during this life. They may have strong memories of things that have happened at all ages. There may even be past life recall and remembering where the soul was before this incarnation. There is a big keynote at the Uranus return at 84 in preparing for the next stage. Because as the Tibetans say, life is preparation for death. And all these major transits that people have gone through, their 2 Saturn returns, the Uranus Opposition, Chiron Return. It's at the Uranus return, if they didn't figure it out earlier, to remember that we have a temporal existence and time is of the essence. So the Uranus return at 84, if one makes it to that full astrological lifetime, could be a very spiritually illuminating time. It is a time when people will make strong connections about this life. If they're still quite coherent, cognizant, and they have done their Saturn work of taking care of their physical health, the Uranus opposition opens a huge portal or doorway to connecting with the soul and preparing for the next phase of the soul's sojourn through the universe. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine on the major astrological life transits. Remember to download, share, and if you really liked it, give it a 5-star review. This is Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine signing off, sending healing vibrations through the quantum field.